Meeting rooms will never die. They're the places that bring people together, where the truly unique ideas are born. But does the traditional meeting room satisfy the needs of the future? It's expensive, fixed, and full of materials which are impossible to recycle. We are living out one giant workplace experiment. Leases are getting shorter, spaces are changing faster. So we need furniture that's movable, reconfigurable, and scalable. The meeting room has been one of the few exceptions until now. Meet Verandas, the meeting rooms you never throw away. We have created an engineered room system that is inherently sustainable, incorporates massive design choice, and is built for the future. Its modular design means any room variant can be disassembled and its component parts reused to create an entirely different structure. The durability of the system means this process can be endlessly repeated, eliminating waste. Here, we have a flexible, sustainable framework able to adapt to the evolving needs of the workplace in a circular fashion. Verandas, the meeting room choice if you care about the future. Arrive, thrive, and leave without a trace.
Well, thank you very much for joining our 49th Insights Live panel discussion. This discussion is centered around the topic of the clubhouse and the private sanctuary. What do we want from our workspaces, and how do we create it? Joe Rokes and myself are joined by four terrific panelists. We have Katie with Scala Studio, Tiffany with Brookfield Properties, Michelle with PayPal, and Satoko with CBRE. We want to thank you for joining us both here on Zoom and on LinkedIn Live. And we also want to thank our four panelists and look forward to their insights, their thoughts, their comments around this topic, what they're proving in their area of expertise, what they're proving from their clients, as well as just practical experiences. Please drop any questions as we go throughout this discussion, both in the chat box here on Zoom and on the chat box on LinkedIn, and we'll try to answer them in best fashion as we can as we go throughout this webinar. I'd like to start off by having the panelists introduce themselves. Katie, tell us a bit about yourself and Scala.
I'm Katie Chapman. I'm the Director of Projects and Operations at Scala Studio, headquartered out of LA, but I'm in Denver, Colorado. And we primarily do workplace and hospitality work.
Awesome, welcome. I'm very glad to have you with us today. And Tiffany.
Hi, good morning. My name is Tiffany Leem. I run design for Space Plus for Brookfield Properties, which is our flexible workplace business. And we work nationally across our different regions, but we are headquarters in New York.
Thanks, Tiffany. Michelle?
Good morning. I'm Michelle Palema. I'm head of workplace design for PayPal, and I am in Scottsdale, Arizona.
Thanks, Michelle. And Satoko.
Hi, it's nice to hear Michelle. Good morning from me. Good afternoon. I'm Satoko from CBRE, workplace strategist and a global real estate company in London. And I do things around workplace strategy, like workplace, the right sizing, hybrid workplace modeling, user engagement to address the best workplace experience, or sometimes do the workplace brief development. So mostly around the workplace strategy set. So I'm looking forward to hearing about the latest thinking from others today.
Yeah, fantastic. And Joe, go ahead and introduce yourself today.
Thanks, Gordon. Joe Rokes, Vice President of Strategic Accounts here at Space Door, based in sunny California.
Thanks, Joe. And I am Gordon McDonald, based in Philadelphia. So we'd like to start off this topic around the clubhouse versus the private sanctuary in our workspaces. Obviously, the workspace what's really interesting is we started these webinars back at the beginning when we were all locked in looking for things to do at the beginning of COVID. And they've really evolved. As noted, this is our 49th episode, and just the insights and thoughts that have come out. But I think what's interesting to see is how organizations are evolving their approach to their workplace. And I'd like to start with you, Michelle, as a end user on this call and this conversation. How are you finding it at PayPal? What insights can you give us? And then we'd like this to be a free-flowing discussion, so we'd like everyone to chip in.
Thank you. Thanks for the question. It has been a journey. PayPal in particular is a little later to putting in any sort of return to office. So employees at this point, since COVID, have really been up to them coming in the office versus working from home. Of course, we want to enhance that collaboration and that innovation and create our workspaces that just better up the way that they work. So we've really tried to lean into surveys asking our employees, what can we do to best support your work? We found a few things. The number one we're hearing is technology, that we need a seamless technology advancements that can help us to collaborate with our virtual colleagues, create an equitable experience. Number two is flexibility. We need flexible spaces that I can use for a one-on-one with my boss, or I can have a brainstorming session with my team, be able to call in virtual teammates as well. And lastly, I think places for fun. You know, work in the hierarchy of human spaces, home is our number one place, work is our second space. And we really want to make sure we're enhancing that it makes it feel comfortable and can help just create that level of, I want to be there. That, you know, home is great, but the workspace is somewhere where I feel just as comfortable and just as excited to make my way.
Yeah, that's really good to hear. And that really leans into that piece around the private sanctuary. So, you know, as we're at home, that is really, it's our own domain. It's where we feel the most comfortable. And how do we translate that? And Katie, I'm going to lean on you on this one. Are you seeing that in some of the new designs as you're planning offices and hospitality?
Yeah, we are. We actually, the project we're working on right now, we have about a 70% occupancy for desks. So 70% of the total population has a desk, but we also have one alternate seat for every 3 desks. And an alternate seat could be a working height couch with a laptop table, or a booth, or a enclosed booth, or a stool with a high table. All of these are, we count them as working spaces if there is a table to put something down on and you have an ergonomic sit. It's not like too far back. You have a back on your stool because nobody wants to sit on a stool without a back for too long. And then we're also putting in one booth, one enclosed booth, either a single person, 2-person, or 4-person booth for every 8 desks. And then we also have a 1-to-1 locker ratio so that people have a private space for their things, but can go somewhere else and drop their backpack, not necessarily at a desk and take up a monitor in a seat, but they could put it at a lounge and then go to their meeting and then meet up with the friend that they say, like, are you going in on Tuesday? Great, I'm going to go in on Tuesday too.
Love to ask the question, what was the science behind those metrics, behind the 1-to-1 locker, the 8-to-1 phone room? Because we often get questions asked from our clients about that. You know, do we need to bring a locker for every associate? Do we need to, how many phone booths do we feel like we're going to use? We have projects now, and it seems like, Joe, you can speak to this as well, where we're literally going back and scattergunning, you know, phone booths throughout a floor plan. The project's been completed for a year. And I said, you know, we missed this piece when we were doing the initial design. So how can we give them a little bit of science on the front side of it when we're in the design phase? Love to hear any comments around that.
Sure. The way we went about it is we wanted to make sure there was a locker for every desk. So if you're coming in, you have a place to put your stuff. In terms of the alternate seats, what we did is we tried to break up the space with those alternate seating, and it just sort of worked out to be like 1 to every 3. And that's how on this floor plate, it really helped to not make it just a sea of workstations, but a topography of different ergonomic and postural sits. So some of them are lower, some of them are higher, and that helps people orient themselves on the floor, not just like with color or pattern, but this is the topography of where I'm sitting. And then we also use those booths to break up space. We would put a couple of them in line to break up a space if there's like too wide of a space, or push them up against the wall if we've got, you know, a little bit of space, not enough to put another bank of desks. So we put in a few more meeting spaces. But I'd be interested to hear from Satoko what you're doing on the strategy end.
Yeah, I mean, the locker is always a bit of a hot topic. So, I mean, particularly before COVID, say one person has got one locker, that was a starting point. After that, more now, it's depending on the business policy on the hybrid model. So, for instance, if say mandatory is 5 days, or people mostly come into office 5 days, 4 to 5, still 1-to-1 is the right way of doing. Some of the company is 1 day a week. So when it become like that, it's going to be quite a waste of space to provide in the locker one per head. So for instance, our office has got 2 type of lockers. One is for day locker. The other one is assigned locker. Assigned locker is people can ask for it if people are coming more than 3 days a week. So that's already becoming, you know, the making more space efficient. But I think that works. But even yeah, I think that's a kind of a strategy. And then interesting, you know, Katie, you say 70% people have a desk, because our office is like less than 50, almost like we call it a me versus we space. So the more really hybrid business, you know, people are more like a 50-50. And then if the model is 1 or 2 days a week, it's gonna be we with more like a more collaboration space. It's getting more. But having said that, people still trying to get into the office, drop your stuff in the desk and secure your screen, and then still trying and then go to collaboration. So this is another aspect of the change management, how to, you know, manage the behavior. That's always a challenge. I think that's probably the common for everybody.
Yeah, I know for us, when we start those locker conversations with most clients, and I think it's universal now, there isn't a mathematic ratio that makes sense across the board for every company, for every sector. You know, this many dedicated lockers, this, you know, flex use lockers. I think we want to learn, we want to hear how the space is used, how employees might use their lockers, and make a suggestion from there. And I think the same is, you know, kind of true with booths. Gordon, you mentioned there is a ton of activity now with people saying, we missed booths when we did our design 2 or 3 years ago. And I think it started with just fit as many as you physically can. And now I think there's a more thoughtful approach about, yeah, maybe we don't want a booth directly next to somebody's workstation because they are acoustically sound, but still you are going to hear some of the conversation, and you don't want that person sitting in a box right next to where somebody's at a workstation. So I think there's been a shift there, not only with the booth layout, but additionally with collaboration spaces, just thinking about how these different work points and work types all work organically in a floor plate, but putting them in a comfortable position where they'll actually get used. One thing, Katie, you mentioned in a past conversation, which is really stuck in my head, was people don't want one thing, they want everything. And I think that is very true, not just in our workplace, but in general. That is how I think a lot of us are wired, and I think it's good. You know, I love the idea that somebody doesn't just come in and sit at a desk for 8 hours and go home, or sit in a booth for that matter and go home after 8 hours, but does a little bit of all the things and gets time with their, you know, their coworkers, gets time to do their focus work, and having those different kind of work points and setups for all of those activities. Tiffany, one thing you were mentioning in developing a new space is that you engaged your employees to give feedback, which another thing that's been happening a lot more. People are being brought to the table to contribute their thoughts. So I'm kind of curious to hear how that went, and also how much did they actually know was true to what they were asking for, was really that they wanted, that they've showed, we want these, and now they're actually using them. So if you could share some on that.
Yeah, so for a little context for the audience, we designed our corporate office space about 2 years ago. And, you know, what Space Plus does is that we provide pre-built to turnkey products nationally. So we're constantly hearing from tenants, brokers, our leasing teams of like what people are asking for in different regions. So this is the first time we actually got to apply a lot of our concepts to our own office space. So our initial step was surveying the employees and asking them like, what do you need? What do you want? What would be essential to the day-to-day to bring you back into the office? So we kind of categorize everything between absolutely need, nice to have, and like a really nice perk. So a lot of people were saying like they want booths, they want phone booths. Some people were saying they wanted lockers. We are very desk heavy, so everyone has a dedicated workstation, but we were very cognizant that people weren't spending 9 to 5 at their workstations every single day, and providing the variety of different space types and working areas was really essential to the day-to-day. And that's kind of what we extrapolated from the survey, is that people are like, well, I need a phone room that I could do head down work, but I'd like it to fit another person. So if I have like a team thing, I could huddle together in front of a screen. People wanted open booths where they could kind of openly and a little bit more publicly work together. And so we kind of developed this whole range between private, semi-private, semi-public to fully public, and just tried to scatter that throughout the space. So we've been in our office for about 1.5 years now. I would say the booths are used nearly every single day. Those are always occupied, and people have been respectful of not monopolizing their time in there. I would say the lockers do not get used, barely. I'd say they're about 20% used. But people, we have been seeing a lot of people moving around, being fluid and flexible in how they're working, and that really varied to what we had prior in our old office space. So it's been really great to see people utilizing different space types.
Does that really speak to that, the clubhouse mentality, what we were starting off with? Because I was thinking, really, if you look at like an airport lounge, and I know we spoke about this yesterday, where we have a corporate client that's actually designing their design team on the workplace side is actually designing their airport lounges. I think it's really interesting. I'm thinking about, an American Airlines lounge. You go in there, there's different types of seating, there's different levels of privacy. And we're really seeing a kind of, use the word, no pun intended, but the flight to that in the workplace, where our associates are asking, we do want different settings. There are different, kind of back to Katie's point, different typologies throughout the space that we can drop down in depending on the activity or the conversation we're having.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of, we're definitely studying different furniture types where we could incorporate integrated power. Like that is essential to people being able to fluidly move around and work around, is the ability to plug in their phone, their laptop, and not worry about the connectivity. So, and that's very much aligned with the airport lounge, right? People are in transit, they need to plug in, they need to make a quick phone call, answer some emails. And so how do we make that really easy and convenient to everyone in the workplace? And that has just been really essential and kind of what we apply to all of our projects and turnkey and all of that.
We found using this airport lounge terminology a really easy way for our clients to understand the different typologies. When we say typologies or postural, they're kind of like, I don't like, why would we have a couch? And then we explain to them, well, when you go to a airport lounge, what do you like about it? They're like, oh, I like that I could be here, or I could be here. And we're like, well, that's exactly it. That's what we're aiming for. So thank you for bringing that up. It's actually been a really helpful tool, that word, that phrase in design.
I think that's really interesting points, that because the airport lounge, as I said, it's right for comfort seat and the right type of desk, and they have got power. But the other things is about airport lounge is it's a kind of it's not for, the long-term work. So it's maybe max 2 hours. That's really differentiated between the desks and the airport lounge space. So that's interesting, but I'm not sure if the desk is high proportion of the space, and then having also airport lounge type of space on top of it, it's kind of a limit to like a collaboration. So that's probably another thing that probably adding on top of, because on top of a airport lounge type of seating, isn't it? Because the lounge is a lot space is more like a solo focus with various type of work settings. So what's others' view about this? Because the collaboration, we talked about the phone booth is quite popular, but it sounds like quite a lot of solo seating rather than team in a clubhouse, let's say. And do you have kind of any kind of a typical popular setting as a club lounge, like team table with interactive screen, open, semi-open? So probably Michelle, how you have?
Yeah, I think that's a great point to talk about. And I think what it comes down to is variability and flexibility, that people want to have that choice, just like Katie said, we want it all. And so to have that desking for when I just need to be heads down focus, I want to also have those multiple sizes of conference rooms so that I can bring my team together in maybe a more upright setting. But then I also want a lounge space to bring the team together when we want to be a little more relaxed, a little buzzier, a little more free flowing. Now, one of the main things that I've really focused on is, just like you were saying, collaboration spaces. You can do them in so many varieties, but what draws people in? In my experience, it's been the semi-private. And actually, one of the things I studied was these privately owned public spaces. So outside of banks, they have their own little parks, maybe they have some gazebos. In the city, you see a lot of these, and you kind of look at why people really enjoy them. It's because they can feel like they have their own spot and they feel a little secured, a little covered. And so I started to emulate that in my designs. So you maybe have chairs and a couch that are up against a railing or a wall, and we have somewhat of a semi-cover. And that's where people are drawn to, that they can sit there, they can feel a little covered, but can still see what's going on around them. They're not feeling exposed. Found that with teams as well. They want the couches and the laptop tables and maybe a screen, but maybe we do some acoustical panels around, so they can still see what's happening around them, but they have that psychological safety of feeling a little more covered. And Katie or Tiffany, I want to know if you guys have kind of looked at what collaborative spaces have really been engaging for your teammates and employees.
Yeah, I think it's really, thanks, Katie. I think it's really the semi-private and the semi-public are the spaces that probably get used the most, because there's only a handful of times people really need solo head down work, right? And oftentimes I need to work and collaborate with one or two other people. And so it's hard to do that at a workstation, and you don't want to utilize an entire conference room for that. So, there are booths that we could, fit 3 people and like look at someone's screen and just kind of loosely talk, but it's still buzzy. People could still approach us, but we still kind of have a little bit of privacy and a little bit of that public interaction as well. So we see a lot of people using that, and they weren't used to that before, because before we had just workstations and meeting rooms, and that was it. And so coming to this office, I think people have been really embracing those different space types. And, we're always looking at different furniture pieces that could achieve that and try to utilize it around the floor plate that makes sense. So for instance, like our marketing team is way more collaborative, and they're really into trying out new things, but like our legal section is very, buttoned up a little bit, and like they really love the phone booths. And so we try to utilize these different space types to what works best for the different sectors within our company. And it's fascinating to just kind of watch it in real time. And, Katie, I'm interested to hear like what some of your clients are saying and what they're looking for. And if it's a furniture solution or an architectural solution.
Yeah, it's really client dependent. So we've got one client who's found a lot of success with like a higher top like library table, because when people sit down to work, it feels more approachable because someone can just walk up and they're not like standing over people at a table. They feel like they can sort of just pull up and be part of the conversation and then pull out if they need to, or pull up a seat. But then we have another client that has, predominantly women in their office, and they don't like the taller tables. Like we put almost none of them in because they come up to like here on some women. So it's really, really team focused. And Tiffany, it's so funny that you bring that up. We had talked about like, do we see different things in different sectors? And we aren't seeing different things in different sectors. We're seeing different things in different teams. Our legal teams 100% were like, well, where'd my office go? What do we? So we used a whole bunch of Joe, was it Portal's Light that we ended up using for the little like legal bubbles?
Portals.
Portals. So we used portals to just create just a tiny little office for them, because they were freaking out. They were like, we talk about like the most sensitive things. We're like, but you're talking about it with the other people who talk about sensitive things. So we had a back and forth and agreed they wouldn't have offices, but they could have these bubbles that they could all share. But the marketing teams are like, we want big tables to lay things out on. And the tables have to be white so that when we put our products on them, we can see them really well. And it's entirely team dependent, even when it's a different sector, because we've got clients in like a product sector where they create a thing, and then we've got more knowledge clients or service clients who don't produce anything, but they also have teams that produce collateral, whether that's intellectual or physical.
I love that you brought that up. And I think one thing that's important when you're looking at furniture is that it is team dependent. It's also energy dependent. And I say that because, like you're saying, a high top table, it's great for touching down. You feel like you can easily touch down and go. That's a high energy space and a high energy environment. That's going to do really well in maybe a break room or like right at the main entrance of a large conference room. But on the flip side, maybe it won't be as engaged in like a library where people want to sit and settle. And so that's going to be where you do your lower tables, your lounge seating. And I think that's really important when you're placing these pieces of furniture to figure out like, how do people use it? What's the energy in which people use those places and those seating features? And that's how they're going to be the best engaged, is when you're cognizant of that theory, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, we definitely try and design our spaces like buzzier to quieter to buzzier, so that teams have an option. So it's not like collaboration space next to heads down space. And that's, sort of the flow is like up and down across the landscape. So it's not like this side of the office is quiet and this side is buzzy. And then teams are like, but I want this corner in, but we need heads down, but this is the corner that looks out onto the mountains and we want that corner. Is having that mix. And that's what's beautiful about design, is that it's not so prescriptive. You can't say like there's this many tables. You have to talk with your client and figure out what works for them, and then work with the floor plate that you have, which is usually, right, we've got a triangle one right now. We've got one that's like a donut, and trying to work that around is, that's the magic of design, is working that in.
Isn't that great about design? That like, it just, when it flows, you don't even feel it. It just feels good.
Good design.
Yeah, and it feels organic. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the adjacencies are just, they're really critical, right? From both how people use it, the energies you were talking about, Michelle, but also like the acoustics of everything as well. And it's like, we always want to give people the space types that they need, but we also want to kind of be progressive and push them to try something new as well. And so the great thing about the like furniture solutions is that, if it doesn't work, we can move it around to a team that may, use it way more than another team can. So, it's a constantly evolving, kind of design, like calculation that we're always kind of like studying. And, there are seating charts that are moving, and it's like, okay, is this team going to be able to use like the high top table, for instance, or like are they going to utilize the phone booths, you know? So we're carefully also studying how the teams utilize those different spaces, and sometimes they surprise us. Sometimes they are using it just because of that adjacency to their workstation and to different teams that they're collaborating with, which is really great. So it's just something that we're always like cognizant of and making sure that we are, you know, documenting that metric and studying it.
Yeah, I do think there's definitely things that did not work historically, and I'm glad they're being revisited. But I do think there's a relearning phase that's kind of happening now, because if we think about an airport lounge, everyone goes in and you find your spot, but they're loud. There's a sense of energy, and it's calming in a way. At least for me, it feels good. You know, I feed off that momentum. I can hear the buzz of the space while I'm doing my work. It's good. And if you try and incorporate that into an office space, I feel like there is a resistance of, no, I need quiet, I need focus time, because it's what people got used to when they were working at home. So I do think there's a rewiring of, yes, completely understand you need your focus time when you're working on something that's due tomorrow and you just need to shut a door, but also encouraging that you're with your coworkers, maybe coworkers you don't interact with on a day-to-day, but you feed off that momentum and the energy from their conversations. So a bit of a tangent, and we do have some questions, so I'm going to jump to those. So the first one we've got in here, do you do occupancy data on your furniture type utilization? Michelle, I think you mentioned that you guys were exploring some of that. Do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so we're always looking for how we can grab more data. One of my things I say is data wins arguments, and data makes good design. So we want to know how people are using spaces and engaging with them. It's difficult, though. I definitely can empathize with that. On one hand, you know, we've really tried to look at utilization data for our conference rooms, not only if they're being used or not, but how many people are using them and for how long. And that is really looking to guide our, you know, rebalancing of our programming ratios. As we've gone into a hybrid way of working, we shouldn't do the same number and sizes of conference rooms that we did, you know, 5 days a week. We know that there's going to be some changes there. And so we're trying to capture that data to really understand it. Now, when it comes to, you know, we spaces, the very collaborative spaces, that one's been a little more difficult. You know, we've considered WAP data, looking at the Wi-Fi signals, but at this point, the technology is not there to have really pinpointed heat maps to know which pieces or which sectors. It's more kind of like a wide array hanging in that Wi-Fi use. So at that point, we're really looking at conference room data as kind of our most reliable, but I would love to hear if anyone else has found a way to look at the utilization data of collaborative spaces.
Yeah, we have got a few different tools to address the type of work setting and the proportion of it. So the first one is obviously utilization data. The one that started becoming kind of a hot topic, it's more like a sensor. The sensor that, you know, there's a heat map that you can collect from the sensor, the ceiling mounted sensor that address which work setting is it used for, duration, number of people, that can be done. So that's really powerful because it's really dry data, but not always you can install a data, you know, sensor. So the other way is traditionally still works. It's just a simple floor work observation. It's just, you know, this is still one of the best way to find it. And then also we do for some client to do that more like a sentiment survey, for user survey, but then we have a specific question to say, so, you know, if you have a week or day as 100%, you know, how much proportion you use your day or week for desk or collaboration at ABC. And that's also really good to understand what type of work settings actually, you know, should be allocated or popular. So that these things we do use as strategy point of view. How about you, Tiffany? I'm just spotting you.
Unfortunately, we don't really utilize kind of any devices that way, kind of go kind of the old school method. And usually people will say like, you know, if this room doesn't really get used a lot, can we change it to something else? And, you know, we just kind of make a note of it, and, you know, that's on our radar. But no, we don't really do heat maps or kind of checking on occupancy or sensors or anything like that.
One thing I thought was interesting, we heard a leader of a co-working space that was talking about heat map sensors, and they were using it amongst different groups. One, to identify kind of what's working, what are the hot spots, but they had also used it from a facility side to know what spots need to be cleaned more frequently throughout the day. Like what rooms, what areas are people going to on a higher basis where, you know, every 2 hours, if they can get somebody in there to clean things up, it would be beneficial. So I think it's an interesting way to look about sensors, other than just, you know, is the space working, but also what other groups and functions can benefit from that data. I'm going to jump to another question here. And this one we kind of hit, but I'll just throw it out there if we have any other thoughts. But what are your best practices to balance and control noise between open individual work area with breakout adjacencies? And Katie, you kind of talked about that with your space planning techniques, but any additional thoughts you would add to that?
Yeah, so we actually use booths as a block when like we can't quite get like that smooth transition from quiet to semi-quiet to buzzier, because they do, you know, it's still an open floor plan. We still have open ceilings, but that wall of booths, you know, whether they're glass-sided, two-sided, whatever, does block a little bit of that. And a lot of the furniture that we put in is softer and tends to absorb some of that. But a lot of it really just is design. We aren't seeing a lot of acoustical privacy with, you know, with like panels. That's more like a visual, like comfort privacy. The sound is kind of what it is, you know, white noise machines and whatnot. It's really hard to get like a totally silent open office, and we didn't have that pre-pandemic either, which is what everybody honestly hated about open work, because they had that one loud talking colleague that they couldn't say anything about previously, and now we feel much more comfortable speaking up about that. But it's got to come down to design and using the space and figuring out what areas are just naturally more quiet, where are there more softer materials, less reflective materials.
Yeah.
So some clients is actually quite start allocating or dedicated to quiet space or focus space. So there are team zones has got different noise level desks and collaboration as a one set, but also some specific area, just purely quiet space for anyone can use. It wasn't popular before, but I started hearing more and more the need, because of people more coming back to the office and people so used to work, you know, without having noise. So therefore, I think the needs started becoming more, you know, the demanding, I think.
You know, go ahead, Michelle.
You know, I just wanted to ask you guys, one of the things that has been brought up to us when we've started talking about it was the concept of a quiet car. You know, on a train, there's the quiet car. So people have asked, can we have a quiet neighborhood of desks where you are only supposed to be heads down? And so for the people who have that need for complete silence of designing in a space, pros and cons to it, of course, but I would love to hear this team's thoughts on that.
So we tried really hard to implement that on this floor plan with this client, and the pull of teams was just like too strong. Yeah. We were like, no, like you guys are all one like unit, you're all one division, use the whole floor. And they were like, right, but my team, where does my team sit? So that's where we've had the biggest pushback. But we have, Satoko, thank you for reminding me. We do put in like little focus rooms throughout the floor plate. So there's like 6 or 8 people in like quite literally like study carrels, where the point is to just be totally heads down. There is no sound. I once had a client call them her mushrooms. So they wanted like a room that was like a little bit darker, quieter, so that they could just like sit in the corner and code in like an almost dark environment. So we have been incorporating spaces rather than open area because it is so hard, even if like you've got an open space, you know, surrounded by conference rooms, so it's like a little more isolated. It's still really hard, you know, people walking by, someone walking up to ask somebody something. It's hard to get that like true quiet and then somehow make it a shared resource. That would take like you'd have to, it almost feels like you'd have to have one whole team on a floor, or, you know, two teams on a floor that can share that space. When you've got multiple teams, it just feels like, oh, well, we've got this in our space. There's still like a fiefdom desire that we're trying to like push people out of.
Yeah, I think I know with our space, we have kind of like those focus rooms kind of peppered throughout. But when we do kind of like these big office amenities, we would try to do like a section that's a little bit more of a quiet zone. So for instance, you know, a lot of the spaces, these amenity spaces are open, there's booths, there's lounge, there's, you know, a bar, but there's, you know, if there's an opportunity to kind of put like a library quiet space, we find that tenants like that too. And it's like a retreat from their office space, but still within the building, and they can kind of just like focus in this very quiet, more hospitality focused space that they don't necessarily have the room for in their suite, which has been really nice. But it's really like a space thing. Like we don't have really the space to really provide that, but we try to do variations of that kind of focused soundproof room or area or pod kind of throughout.
I think it's coming back to, sorry, it's coming back to the balance between, if you have got high portion of the desk may not really necessarily provide a quiet space, but if a lot of the spaces are used for collaboration, there is a need to provide some quiet space. I think that's about the balance at the end.
Yeah, it really leads me to a question that's come in about incorporating well-being in the workplace. And I think it's something that we are seeing, especially post-COVID or post-pandemic, however you want to term this, that, you know, well-being, because that is one of the things that we all enjoyed, was being able to get up, go for a walk, you know, in the morning, get a, you know, cup of coffee, walk the dog, take 10 minutes with our family, go back to our heads down home office. And I think, you know, even just having that break from the screen, having the break from, you know, constantly focusing on, you know, whatever's in front of you, is something that we all miss, that just, you know, those little interruptions. So love to know, Michelle, give this question over to you, how you're bringing the well-being within your workplace there, especially now that you're focusing on the return to the office.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, something really cool that as we've taken a step back and started reimagining our workspaces, you know, globally throughout many different sectors, is that there's a strong look at neurodiversity, and that we're not a one size fits all, you know, group of humans. We all like certain things best. Some of us want to be in that buzzy, kind of like coffee shop area, and some of us need that really quiet. And so having that diverse set of energy throughout our spaces is extremely important. Just like I've heard a lot of the other panelists say, PayPal does incorporate library spaces, quiet spaces, areas that encourage that stillness. And we want to have those places of retreat. And we have that in two ways. One of that is a place that is intended to work in stillness and work in quiet. And the other one is just to be still and quiet. We call them our wellness rooms. They're not revolutionary. We've been seeing them for years, but we're seeing an uptick of request for them, and for them to get a little bigger and maybe have a couple more amenities within the space. Previously, they were seen as just for someone who maybe had a headache, or maybe needed to go somewhere for quiet time of prayer meditation. But we've seen it expand of just someone who needs that 15 minutes of stillness and silence that they got very used to at home, that they could create that space at home. And we want to give them the freedom to create that space in the office. And we've made that a standard for our offices moving forward.
Awesome.
I think just incorporating those things, don't want to say normalizes it, but it brings it to the forefront that if this is beneficial for you throughout the day, it's there, we're thinking of you, and use it. One other question, this one's a kind of a spicy one, but somebody asking, how do you avoid the library moments in a semi-private space when somebody may be looking at inappropriate content? I don't know if anyone's got any thoughts on that. That seems like a different problem, but yeah.
I mean, we try not to make any space too private, like even, you know, privacy distraction. We don't make it totally opaque. We might, like, instead of someone walking behind you and seeing like your back to the door and someone can see your screen, we'll turn them to the side. But if you're walking one way or another, you can still see it. But in the semi-private spaces, we tried not to put too opaque of a film from that. And then also from like an employee safety too. Like a lot of the companies we work with are predominantly women and we want people to feel safe. And if you're too enclosed, if you're not like in a wellness room or in a mother's room, like where you absolutely, or a bathroom where you absolutely want privacy, we don't want full privacy where people could possibly be, you know, treated poorly or misuse company equipment.
Yeah, no,
Yeah, I would echo what Katie had said. Like, even if we're trying to make like a conference room a little bit more private, we wouldn't do like a full opaque film on the glass. We would do like a gradient film. So you can kind of see that there's movement in the room, but there's privacy on the screen, that sort of thing. So I would say our only super private room are the wellness rooms, the mother's rooms. But there's some transparency in kind of all these semi-private spaces that we create.
Yeah, makes good sense. This is another question I think is quite interesting and we've seen handled in different ways, but are you trying to do IT enabled absolutely in every furniture solution, or do you have a blend of IT and non-IT spaces?
So anywhere where we have like our alternate seating, that's not like a workstation with like a monitor and like an ergonomic task seat, we try and put power there into either the seat or the table. Otherwise, people will not use it. If there's just like a table and a couple chairs sitting in the middle of nowhere with no power, it will not get used. But for our boost solutions, we do a mix of, some of them are wired to have a screen and some of them are not. And you just have to, you know, bring your own device and point at your laptop screen. And that helps to keep those spaces moving a little bit. But all of our alternate seating, we absolutely put power. And if we don't have power, we've got, you know, like the little power banks or the power threads. We get power somehow to there, or else they will not. We know that for sure. They will not get used if there's no power.
Yeah, I mean, same here, definitely integrated power wherever possible. And then anything that is currently enclosed with 3 or more seats, our standard is to have video conferencing technology in there. And just now we're starting to evolve to put that video conferencing technology in our smaller rooms. Now, pre-COVID, we found those small rooms to be your phone rooms. You needed a quick chat, and then that's what it was used for. It was in and it was out. Now we're finding that people are craving single person VC rooms to have those one-on-one conversations that we're used to having at home. I know my boss, she is across the country, so she's virtual. Any one-on-ones we have, I'm only going to need a single person room. And I'm not comfortable taking those calls from my desk. So I want to go find a space. And that's what we found for a lot of people. And that's kind of a new standard we're going into. We're just designing those spaces right now, but I think that is really important. And future state, we're trying to incorporate VC technology in every single enclosed room. Now, what we're toying with is the technology in the semi-private spaces or semi-public spaces. So it's your booth seating that have maybe 3 walls or just 2 walls. We've heard some people request it. And my personal feeling is that it won't be used to the highest capability because you don't have that high level of privacy. You know, people are listening in on that. And I would love to hear from the team if you guys have found any success putting in technology into your semi-public spaces.
We have not for that reason. I think people, if they're presenting on a screen, they still want a little bit more privacy, knowing that, you know, people are going to be walking around the office all day and could, you know, totally glance at someone's presentation. And we find from like a noise perspective too, that if it's open, you kind of have a screen that's open, it could be a little bit disruptive to the people at their desks that are adjacent to those areas. So we found that we haven't, it hasn't been successful for us. And we don't really see a lot of tenants asking it for it as well. So they still want that privacy with the screen. They still want the four walls enclosed. And again, like if it's semi-private, semi-public, like people will just share on their laptop, and that seems so far to work okay.
I think a semi-public area, like with a screen, it seems kind of more like a high table with a screen, and that it seems to work in semi-public area because it's more like interactive and meant to be quick discussion rather than spending an hour or two. So that even that's kind of an open and visible, but if that's within the team area for the quick chat with the team using screen and a high table with the stool, it seems work rather than kind of a normal, you know, seating height and a screen. That's the example I see in some more like a consultancy firm. It works really well. And also coming back to the little bit about the power supply, we sometimes recommend not to have a power on purpose, because as long as there is a power supply, people can come with the charger, can spend all day. If the purpose is for just as purely touchdown for quick team chat, it's sometimes on purpose. But having said that, some of the clients agree to do for day one, but a year later, they actually install the power on the desktop. So that's probably still in the balance between what we should provide or not, the similar to meeting booking panel. So yeah, that's probably, it depends on the client needs.
Yeah, that
Yeah, the most
reminds me a lot of,
successful-
sorry, go on, Katie.
I was going to say the most successful uses have also been like those tall, like higher tables for more of like a standing meeting where you plug in your laptop and you're like, okay, here's the task you're going to do, here's the task you're going to do. Because people are very like self-conscious, like doing a presentation. Like people don't like to give presentations generally, and they really don't want to give them to the whole office. So when we've seen it best utilized is when it's a stand-up or in like a very small, like we've done some very small VC offices or PE offices. And then we've had like a couple screens around, like a mobile screen around a like a lounge area. But this is like a 15-person firm where 6 of them are going to sit down together. So it's more like closer to an all hands, which of course, you know, we always have technology for our big clients. But those are like the 2 times we've seen that work. Otherwise, it mostly gets unused because what people want a screen for is to have virtual conferencing. Is a lot of what we do right now because we are mixed, you know, we're hybrid. Some people are at home, some people are at work. So that's what people really want to screen for, we're finding.
Yeah, and that actually brings me to a question that's come in that some industries have yet moved over to laptop usage only. So what kind of flexible planning solutions do you have for clients or user group that works mostly on desktop computers? And this is actually something as my role of strategic accounts, I work with a lot of financial clients that they are still tethered to the desktop. They're not able to use Wi-Fi. They're not able, even clients that are not able to use Bluetooth technology, whether it's a keyboard or a mouse. And so what we're finding, and this kind of goes back to something that came in about deliberately not putting power in a space, and it goes back to that piece about the, you know, airline lounge. There are times when you go in there and there's no power and they deliberately only want you there for 30 minutes and then move to a different area to plug in and have that heads down time. But that being said, on the flip of that, we are also getting asked by many of our clients, can you please bake technology into your furniture? You know, we don't like things as an afterthought. If you're going to put in monitors, make sure you put in 2 monitors. If you're going to put in, so I think that is certainly something we're seeing, because that is the piece of it that a lot of employees can't get at home, where that technology is readily available, easy to do. A particular client comes to mind where they put, monitors up across, they are using our Portals room product. They put monitors up across on one wall, scoot the table to the opposite wall, so that they can do their presentations. But all of that is already in place. The user just walks in the room and away they go. So I certainly think that is something we're seeing. That being said, we are now at the 5 minutes to the end of our time. If anybody has any, we don't have to use all the time, but if anybody has any closing comments, I'd love to hear it. We really appreciate the conversation that we've had. We trust that our audience has appreciated the insights that Katie, Michelle, Tiffany, and Coco have given to us. I feel like this has been a really lively conversation, and very relevant to the market today. So love to hear if anybody has any closing comments. Joe, any parting famous words from you?
No pressure. No, I think when we started these, I imagine it would go for about a year. People would go back to the office and then these conversations would fall flat. But I am, when the pandemic first started, everyone that is not in the industry that I'm friends with said, "Are you freaking out?" Because what you do in your day-to-day is, it seems like people are never going back to an office. And I think every time we have one of these, I become more encouraged and more inspired to hear, we're trying this. Or these employees came to us and they said, "We'd really like if we had this." And we're trying like all these new ideas that people are brave enough to explore and try and then share. It's just incredibly inspiring. And I keep loving getting these times to have these conversations with different folks. So thanks everyone for joining, for the panelists, and then anyone who joined us on LinkedIn. Thanks for making time to be with us today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you all.